WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are still broadcasting in high definition mono sound here at AM 1570 on your dial. Make sure you're setting a place. We're doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. I'm going to have some crab cakes with my guest here, and we're going to set them up with some Raven scratch-offs and, of course, some holiday cash droppers as well, because I got to get back down into the city. We had all the COVID stuff last year, and crab cake tours and oyster tours and brewery tours and all that stuff. We're going to be at G&A Coney Island. Not in Highlandtown anymore. No longer in the city, out in the county. We're going to be out in White Marsh on Thursday. Got some great guests coming by. My pal Mike Shue, formerly of WJZ, is going to be stopping by. There's a rumor that Tony Delarose is going to be coming by as well, and my pal Nick Fisher from Wise Markets as well. All of it brought to you by our friends at Window Nation as well. 866-90-NATION. You buy two, you get two free, and you have 60 months, 0% financing, which helps a homeowner like my pal Chris Pika, who's about to come in here. You know, dude, there's like G&A moves from the city out to the county. I moved out to the county. I was in the city for 20 years. You left the city, went all over the world with Michael Jordan, got yourself into ESPN 30 for 30, whole deal. And then you come back and you move into the city here near your homeland just in time for Ravens playoffs. Dude, it's been like 4 months since I've had you on. How was your football season, man? You're like in Boise one weekend and you're in Broken Pelvis, Kansas, and you've been everywhere, brother, right?
Yeah, the last half of the season is always crazy, especially when the bowls are concerned. We got our last regular season game was in Pullman, Washington, the Apple Cup, Washington State, which was an absolute barn burner out there. You know, it's surprising when you look back on it when Mike Leach passed away, the Mississippi State coach. We actually did the Mike Leach tour this year. One of our first games was at Mississippi State. There was a weather delayed game. We were at Texas
You
Tech.
still do the cowbells down there, right? Mississippi
Oh,
State?
no doubt. And they were doing the cowbells in the rain for about 2.5 hours till we were able to resume and finish. And then we went to Lubbock to Texas Tech, and then one of our last regular season game was at Washington State. So we saw what the Pirate was able to accomplish at three of the more, I wouldn't say distant, but let's say difficult spots to win in college football. And then we got the bowl season. We were assigned to a FCS, or for those of a certain age, the 1AA playoff quarterfinals. We had Holy Cross.
Or as we call it, the one Towson can play in.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So Holy Cross was out of South Dakota State. We went to the famous Idaho Potato Bowl for television, which was a pretty good game. I worked for ESPN Radio with my announcers from the season. We had a heck of a game with Arkansas and Kansas. We went 3 overtimes at the Liberty Bowl, and then every year Kate and I go out to Dallas and we work at the Cotton Bowl and a PR function for them. And that game between Tulane and Southern California was one for the ages, especially with Tulane's late comeback with 15 points in the last 4 minutes to beat a blue blood. Especially having lived in New Orleans for 7 years. I mean, Tulane football has been down for a very long time, and it was nice to see the Green Wave come up and do what they thought they could do against a Southern California team at that has the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, who is going to be a heck of a pro prospect once he finishes his junior year. And he had the defensive player of the year in the Pac-12, who's an incredible talent, but they kept him bottled up. So it was an interesting game and an interesting bowl season. Just glad to be back home and get ready for the NFL playoffs.
Dude, I have such interesting friends. I really do. You know, Chris Pika has blog and tackle. Sometimes you can find him at Baltimore Positive. Sometimes he's on the road working for ESPN and doing spotting and stats and broadcasting and PR and some Bahamas Bowls, all sorts of different things over the course of time. But you and I met at the News America in 1984. You went into PR. I remember seeing your name at UAB show up in the agate type back when I worked, I think even at the paper in the 90s in that time. And then you went on to Birmingham Barons. But to me, your background, the thing you really cut your teeth on, the thing you'd say, I worked for the New Orleans Saints. I worked for the Atlanta Falcons. I worked in the league. I worked Super Bowls. I worked PR. I've been there when firestorms happen with Michael Vicks and different things, really crazy things that happen. And I've been at a lot of football games, bro. You would admit, right? I would always kid Kevin Byrne about how many stadia I've seen an NFL game at. I almost went to Munich this year with Jen Stoner to see another stadium. But because of my generational issues of going to old stadiums with the Astrodomes and Oilers and like all that, just a lot of places. Dude, you've been in a lot of games in an official capacity in a lot of ways. And you were literally my first text when the stretcher was out before they went to the second TV commercial in what they're trying to do in the NFL, because it's really complex, right? Like at the top, they're trying to make money, they're trying to gamble, they're trying to put a television product on, they're trying to play a game, they're trying to officiate a game, they're trying to take care of fans, they're trying to sell beer, they're trying to take care of sponsors, they're trying to hobnob, they're trying like there's just a lot of stuff going on. And then there's something that happens like that stops the whole world, right? And the first thing I text you was, boy, I hope there's a playbook for this, right? And I know in the hours afterward, and now we can say Damar Hamlin heading home. We hope he's going to live a long, healthy, beautiful life. But in the moments, I mean, you had your hat on as a former Saints Falcons person there, even as a media member, which you were at the Cotton Bowl and working officially in all these capacity. Dude, it puts a lump in your throat, takes your breath away as to what happens and what humans are involved in immediately making immediate decisions that they've never made before, because the Titanic's going down and it's going down in real time. And was there a fire drill? So I ask you, I'm going to let you jump in and soliloquy in the way that only you can, Chris Pika, but I know you had thought about this and you've been in these strange circumstances.
Well, I'll go back to my first year in the NFL in 2000. My first ever game was with the New Orleans Saints. It was a preseason game with the Jets. We lost three players in that game to the seat for the season for different things, mostly knees, and I forget what the other one might have been. But we lost three guys, and none of those were they were serious injuries to the players, but they were not a serious injury like we saw with Damar Hamlin. I had one situation in New Orleans, I think in '01, where we had a player who took a stinger on the field and was not moving for a few moments, and they had to bring the ambulance out from the tunnel at the Superdome to take the player off. And then we received word pretty quickly that he was able to move his hands and arms and legs. He was okay. When you're on a sideline and you're with 52 other people who are brothers at this, and you see a player who's down, who's not moving, it is stressful for them because listen, it's a hard game, it's a violent game at times. But I can tell you that as hard and as violent as football is, players are not out to hurt one another. There is a brotherhood. People used to say, well, why do guys, hug each other after the games, and they go out to midfield and they switch, they exchange jerseys and they exchange pleasantries and have pictures taken. It's because it's the brotherhood of playing that type of sport. It's the same thing you see if you after hockey games. It's the same thing you see after rugby games, where it's intense physical combat. You're not out to hurt the guy on the other side. You want to beat the guy on the other side of the line to get to the quarterback and stop the running back or stop the pass play. But in no way are you trying to hurt them. And the scary thing about this situation was the way Hamlin dropped to the turf. Within about 30 seconds, I remembered the young man over at Loyola High School. I remembered that there was a lacrosse player who was hit in the chest with a lacrosse ball in a certain way at a certain point, and that player dropped to the field. And at medical attention, Jeremy Parr, who's the athletic trainer over at Loyola, and his staff got to that player immediately. That young man has made a full recovery. He's still at Loyola. It is a very freak thing, and that was the first thing I thought of. One of the first things I thought of when he landed on the turf after T. Higgins hit him in a normal way. T. Higgins was not attempting to injure him. He was trying to make a play. That's what happens. And it's incredibly scary. I can tell you, sitting in Dallas, I was texting with a friend of mine who is part of I'll say in nebulous ways, is part of the media corps in Cincinnati, who was letting me know in real time what he was seeing from his vantage point that we were not seeing on television. And I was relaying that
Well, television
to
just
the
went away, right? I mean,
right. And
I
I was
went away, and
relaying that.
when I text you, it was 9:06 that I text you. So just to give a timeline, because I went back and looked, because I was in my phone talking to Leonard Raskin or maybe Dennis about this on the show earlier this week, and I literally got up and went to the bathroom. My wife had fallen asleep and didn't see any of it, and she kind of came to right after you and I were texting, and she said, "What happened?" I'm like something really awful there's a kid that might be dying on the field right now. She's like, what? And I'm like, they're not even like, I'm on Twitter and I can't get any info. You know, like there was just nothing. And then I thought to myself in my own journalistic way, well, this is why you want to be a journalist there. Like literally, if it's a Raven player, a Raven issue that pertains to Baltimore and what I do for a living with my radio station and media, and people are looking to people like me for information in the way that we were all looking to, Joe Buck for information, right? Or where
Right.
I was texting you. I mean, you were the only one I was like, wow, I hope Roger Goodell has a playbook for this. That if a
We
tragedy
were
happens, what do they do? Have they fire drilled this?
well, and I was sitting at a table with several other media relations personnel on the college side, and I was relaying what I was getting from Cincinnati to them. The second that I got the text that said they brought out the AEDs to shock his heart, I think all of us at that table took a pause because it was like, oh my God, this is, the worst possible scenario occurring in real time. I remember as a
On
kid,
Monday Night
and
Football in the biggest game of the year, early
right,
enough when everybody
and
is
I'll
awake,
I'll
like
get
the
to some of
whole.
that, right, and there was, and I mentioned in Twitter that there was only one death in the history of the National Football League. It was a wide receiver named Chuck Hughes in a game in October of '71 against the Bears. On his way back to the huddle, suffered a massive heart attack and died on the field. They completed the last 2 minutes of that game. They did not tell the players on either side that Hughes had passed away on the field. They got an ambulance and got him out of there. But times and things have changed. And there are 29 medical personnel on the sidelines. The NFL has, to your point, what we call fire drills in preseason and regular season, where they go through what happens if something like this occurs. You have a massive broken leg, a Theismann injury. You have something like what happened to Damar Hamlin, uh, different other things that can happen. Who is the lead person in that moment? Who is the lead triage person? Where does the ambulance enter the field? You have 29 medical personnel in different fields available on both sidelines. You have the certified athletic trainers for both teams who got out on the field literally in seconds. Okay. What they did to save this young man's life in that moment in a very freak injury that caused this
In
is
front of
nothing
70,000
in
people.
front of 70,000
Right.
people was
Yeah.
nothing short of
Yeah.
miraculous. The only thing I can think of in the last couple of years, and I don't think many will remember this, but a former Tottenham Spurs player, Christian Eriksen, was at the Euros in but 2 summers ago, I believe, or last summer, 2 summers ago. In the middle of the game, he dropped on the sidelines. He was running down the field in a soccer match in the European Championships and dropped. Medical personnel got to him as quickly as they did to Damar Hamlin. They shocked him back to life. He is back playing his sport. I don't know what the future holds for Damar Hamlin. I hope to God that whatever it is, when he woke up from his sedation and he saw the $8 million plus that people gave to his charity because they were honestly afraid for this young man's life and they wanted to support him in any way that they could, you can't help but get emotional because I've been down there and I've seen how that affects players, that affects coaches, it affects referees, everybody, and nothing that I ever saw live in person and close up was anything like that at all.
And you
Okay,
saw some
one
bad stuff.
one stinger and a couple of stingers in 7 years where
Yeah,
they
but
had
that
to
that concern in
immobilize the
that
head.
moment, that
Yeah,
concern in that moment is very, very real. Very,
it's
very
incredibly
real.
real. It's
Yeah.
incredibly real. I mean, when I'm like I said, when I got the text that they were using AED on him, uh, you're hopeful that everything goes according to plan. These are medical professionals that do this for a living. And like I said, the fact that he has come home from the hospital and returned to Buffalo is nothing short of miraculous. And thank God for those people that did that job. And and I think the second point is the game situation, which was so secondary at that moment. You could tell that the players didn't want to continue the game, obviously not knowing what had happened to their teammate and their brother player who's in an ambulance fighting for his life. Everything becomes incredibly secondary. And football is a game that you have to play with your wits about you. You have to be focused on what you do. You have to be focused for obviously the plays and everything else, but you're also focused because the easiest way to get hurt in any level of football is not paying attention. Okay. And I'm sorry, every player on that field's mind was with that young man in the ambulance. It was not on the game that was in front of them that they still had three
Well,
and
it
a
was
half
all of
quarters to play.
America. Nobody in America really expected them to go back and play
No,
football.
no, and so it was very interesting. There is an article from Don Van Natta of ESPN.com about sort of the internal situation that was happening in the New York offices. And I'll explain in a second. There is a game rep from the NFL at every NFL game. They are in communication with the NFL league office in New York for various different reasons. Uh, make sure the game starts on time. Make sure that if there is a blackout, like the Super Bowl, okay, what happens in those cases? And when
From
there
a
is a national,
catastrophic standpoint, the amount of things in modern times with violence, things, security, and like the amount
right,
of things that could go wrong. I mean, dude, we're 35 years removed from a guy coming in with a parachute into the heavyweight championship of the world. And the ring, we've seen all sorts of things. I would think the streaker running across the field. I mean, there's just all sorts of crazy things that happen in real
there
time
there
that
are
that
yep.
especially with media, right? How it's presented on television is how the world sees it, right?
Well, and also, and I won't get into it here, but I'll just say, without getting into specifics, the security meetings and the meetings we had with NFL representatives post 9/11, prior and all the way up through Super Bowl 36 in New Orleans, would raise the hair on the back of your neck. Okay, I mean, we went through some scenarios and some thoughts and how things, if something happened, A, this is what you do, and B, there's a lot of thought that comes into that. And so at national games, about what I mean by national game, every game's national in the NFL, but we're talking about Monday Night Football, Sunday Night Football, Thursday Night Football, and sometimes even the 4 o'clock Sunday game has a national game rep. So rather than a normal
Anywhere you
NFL,
see Joe Buck or Jim Nance or Ian Mike Tirica, like literally, right?
generally, right,
Right.
what you will
Gotcha.
have is a vice president level or above at that station.
And
That
that's
is the
Dawn
NFL
Aponte in
national
this
game,
particular
right?
case,
In
right?
this case, right. That's why she was there. It was a national game. So rather than having, maybe an ex-referee or some other NFL staffer who might be doing the game in New York City for the Jets and Giants, you have a VP level or above because these games are the national game and the only game on television. So Donna Ponte from the league office was that person who was in the middle talking to the game referee, talking to the broadcast networks. Well, maybe not the broadcast network. That's a different point, but also to both teams, ownerships, general managers. There's a lot of moving parts that went on with that. So Dawn was in the center of that as the national game rep for the NFL.
Chris Pika is our guest. He is blog and tackle out on the Twitterverse. He has also been our friend and a Baltimorean by birth and has moved back to Baltimore in recent years. So if you see him around town, yeah, that's the real Chris Pika. He's dusting off his seat cushion for Orioles season and Orioles magic, in addition to doing a bunch of things. So football this week, and I don't want to move from A to B, but obviously we all saw the threes and John and this and that where the Ravens are and where Lamar Jackson, because that would have been the thing I would have been talking to you about. I haven't had you on the show at all during football season. Literally, last time you were on was during the Crab Cake Tour in August. I looked it up from LP Steamers. So I would say to you, seeing this season, seeing Lamar, you and I haven't talked on the air, off the air about anything football related. Where do you put this whole thing? Because it's quite a sports radio spectrum of sign Lamar, give him anything he wants to. He's great, but he doesn't play in January. To what does it look like this week? And if he does play, this is a wild chapter in Purple Rain 3, ongoing right now as to how this is going to turn out for Lamar, for the organization. I will say this. I don't think they'll be in Glendale in 4 weeks playing in the Super Bowl. How about that? Like somewhere between here and there, I don't think they're good enough with Lamar, wherever they are. But this is where the disappointment sets in a week, as you know, lockers getting cleared out, coaches getting fired. You always seem to come on this week and talk about just how awful it was to sit at the Saints or the Falcons and watch people be Greg Roman at that moment in that place and time, and how awful it is in the league this week.
It is. I don't. When I read people saying, "Well, so and so should be fired," or "So and so should be walked out the door," whatever that is, I always cringe because I worked on the inside of that, and I say this every year. It's hard on families. It's hard on the staff. It is an incredibly awkward day in the offices when this happens. I don't wish that on anyone. I don't wish that on a coach. I don't wish that on a general manager. I don't wish that on any sort of staffer who's affected by this. It is a fact of life in the NFL, yes. But for people to root for someone to lose their job is not, having seen that effect on people who their coworkers and family and friends, it's difficult. Yes, it is part of when you accept the gig that happens, but it doesn't make it any harder. And I don't. I'm not a big fan of that. The Ravens this year, we one of the sayings we always had in the Saints building was every week's a season, and that's been very very true with the Ravens from start to finish. Lamar's injury, the fact that the wide receiver core hasn't really been that great. They've had a running game that has disappeared at times. They've had a defense that's been good at times, not good at times. It's been a very strange season. And I've always
Well, there'll
said
never
that
be another one like this where you have double-digit leads like every week, and every loss stem from a game where you had a double-digit lead. And to have the weakness of the schedule, it's been a crazy canvas this year. All of it, money, Lamar, where they are, the age of some guys, where John is, and all of this. Just it's messy, where how the fans feel about it for sure. I've been here for all the playoff runs. I've never felt a week where like we've been in the playoffs and feel like you got to be kidding me, right? I mean, I don't think maybe the Anthony Wright year was the only other year.
probably so. And I've also said this about the playoffs too. Part of advancing in the playoffs is you have to play teams that can't stop what you do well, and you can stop what they do well. The order of opponents to get to a Super Bowl and get to a world championship is almost more important than your health situation going into the playoffs. And when you look at what the Ravens are facing, playing the Bengals team who admittedly beat the B unit, on Sunday, in that last game, and they're going to get, well, the A unit, I guess. I mean, that's to be determined. I know the Ravens went vanilla in the last game. It didn't matter what happened. They just decided, hey, if the Bengals win it, they win the division. So be it. This is the way. This is the way it's going to be. 3 turnovers. It wasn't a great day for the Ravens at all in that last game, and then you turn around and play them again. So that's going to be difficult. If you somehow manage to have a good day and beat Joe Burrow and that offense, you probably turn around and have to play the Chiefs and Mahomes. Okay, so it doesn't get any easier if your defense can't stop Burrow. Then they're going to have a much harder time against Mahomes the following week. They're going to need a lot of luck, and they're going to need Lamar honestly to be very very close to 100%. And I think that is the story going into the game against Cincinnati. Is he 100%? Can he run? Because without his legs, having him sitting back there and being a pocket passer the entire day with Cincinnati's defensive line and the Ravens' makeshift offensive line in some cases isn't really a recipe to win the game.
Where do you fall on the uniqueness of his contract and how that may or may not affect his desire to come back, his economic ability to come back? And this is where I want you to put your PR hat on, Chris. All right, Chris Pika here, Blog and Tackle. Listen, I know 100 PR people, right? And most of you think the same most of the time, but this would be one of those cases for me where the coach matters here, right? Harbaugh peddled the Lamar's going to come back. It's week to week last year, and it all went away. This year, it's been peddled as week to week. We've never seen him on the practice field. There have been reports of limps. There have been reports of swelling. Like all of these reports, right? They come out. And who knows who's getting what information. NFL Network was reporting he was going to play Christmas Eve, right? And Rich Eisen seemed sort of aghast that he might have been lied to, or said there had been a setback, or they felt like they were being honest with me. All of that, as a media member who's now been thrown out famously, the where the honesty is and where it gets you into trouble, and where you're trying to, as a PR director, as an organization, from a marketing standpoint, from just managing your fan base, and having integrity, that you're trying to manage expectations as best you can, so that whatever you say 1 to 3 weeks and it turns into something else. Now, I'll say this, and this is where it gets a little complicated, and this is where I want you to clean up my my ramblings on this. This is where having an agent matters, because the agent then calls Jason Lockenthor or me or Mike Preston or Jerry Sand or everybody, or Aaron Wilson or whatever, and says, whoa, 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 we're getting a second opinion. We're flying Lamar down to see Dr. James Andrews, or whoever the doctor that you want to see. And you're going to come back and say, no, 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 no. This is my Roger Dorn, my $300 million football player, my generational talent, has a level 2 sprain, not a level 1, not a level 3. No, 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 we're not rushing. No, no, no. And would fight for him a little bit on the PR side of what gets reported and doesn't get reported, because this is felt all along to me like, this is Chad, this is John, this is the team trying to wish him back. I don't want to say push him back, but promise him back, or make it appear as though he's coming back. And none of these press conferences with John, and I'm not there to press him. I don't text him about anything other than his integrity lately. I would just say this is where their communication part of managing whatever anybody is to expect is that they now have reporters saying they're honestly in the dark about this. I don't know what to believe. It's sort of like a to tell the truth episode to some degree, because the truth's going to come out in the wash on Sunday night. He's either going to play or he's not, right? I mean, he's going to show up, and he's going to be well enough or he's not. But this last month has been a very cloudy sort of episode as they've skated through this thing, where if they don't have clarity on his injury, and the media doesn't, and the fan base doesn't, and neither do the opponents, which is always John's, deep down, John wants the Bengals to be confused about what's happening this week. Okay, but then they have to go play, and then they're going to have to negotiate with this kid, and whether there's been honor on both sides. And Chris, I would just say this. I've loved watching him play. I root for him. I'd be the first guy with an 8 jersey. I'd be sitting in my seats if they let me buy him, right? So I'm that guy. I'm a Baltimore guy. But watching the Twitter WTFs, watching the not coming to OTAs, watching him hold up a sign, and then watching them can't get out of their own way when he's not in the lineup. Boy, this is a weird negotiation. It's weird all the way around. And I have a feeling whenever they lose, whether it's this week, and God bless them, if they win, it'll be exciting. They get to go to Kansas City, maybe, then they get to play Buffalo, whatever it is that their pathway is. Whenever it ends, this is going to be a really weird episode for them, because I just don't think they're going to say, Lamar, we can't win without you. We love you. Here's $250 million. Come back. Here's a 5-year guaranteed deal. We need you. I don't think that that's how this ends. And I don't know how it ends, but I'm getting the popcorn and I'm ready to write about it and talk about it, because it's a really pivotal time for the organization this week, this game, and everything that happens in the aftermath.
Well, you have a couple things in play, and one is obviously the injury report that is, it's sacred to the NFL for a lot of reasons. You have to indicate whether a player has not practiced, limited practice, or full practice. So this week,
what are the consequences of lying? Can I ask you that?
It's a lot. It's a lot of fines. I mean, it's a fine to the organization.
Well, the league's in on gambling now, which is a completely different place than where John was 15 years ago in trying to play games with Bill Belichick, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, you have to list. I mean, you have to, and the Ravens have listed Lamar. They have listed him as either questionable or out or whatever that is when you get to the end of the week. And especially during the playoffs, doing that during the playoffs increases the fines, increases those issues for the club if they were doing something like this. To your point to Lamar and lack of agent, uh, one of the things that when I was in the league in the early 2000s, social media had just not yet started to kind of rock and roll with players. And so Lamar doesn't need to have a PR person. His PR person is his phone. Okay. He can go on Twitter. He can put out information. He can say whatever he wants to say. He can put anything cryptically he wants to put out. He's his own PR guy. And so that's the biggest change for communication staffs. If a player wants to go, I won't say go rogue because
Well,
it's
Ed
up to them to
Reed's
do
been
that.
out of the league a decade, but he would go on social media and show himself mowing the lawn.
Right. Yeah, you get a lot right, but you get players who are
All the
strategic.
stuff he won't want these kids doing at
Yeah,
Bethune-Cookman.
right. And you get players. Player decides, okay, I've unfollowed my team, I've unfollowed my teammates, and that's a story, okay, because he's not following anybody from his current team, okay, whoever that player was. It happened earlier this year. Okay, that's a big story. People go, oh my God, he's not doing that. So social media is a big part of that. Lamar uses that to whatever end he chooses to use it to. Would it be nice if he had an agent who was making those phone calls to say, hey, this is where they are? There is a competitive aspect. John doesn't really want people to know whether he'll play or not. It's having teams preparing for multiple quarterbacks. You want to make their lives a little harder. Um, and they're going to get to a point here. Some of the rumors about would the Ravens accept a trade for him, and what they could get for him. Those stories started to percolate a little after midseason. So, what
And
the
again,
Ravens,
he's unrepresented in a professional space that can quell some of this, and not representing himself during all of this, because your point, he could say, my knee's a little swollen today. Now, John may not like that one way or another versus the Cincinnati game when he was playing the third string quarterback anyway, but what harm would the honesty be at this point to manage expectations as to whether he's playing this week or not? Like, I don't want to say they owe it to their fan base, because Lord knows they do whatever they want. But Shotty's, since the last time you and I got together, honest to God, dude, you and I got together in August. Bishotti's franchise was probably worth $3.5 billion because we thought that the Washington franchise was only worth 5. Now they're worth 7, so Steve's now worth 5. Bishotti's picked up $1.5 billion since the last time you and I got together. I just think at some point, some transparency about all of this or how it comes out in the wash, because it doesn't feel normal to me, Chris, right? Like, it feels very unnatural, the words of John Harbaugh and what he says and how he says it, and Deshaun Jackson's cryptic sort of stuff this week. It's just, listen,
there
I
there is a
watched
lot of
Georgia
palace
wax
history.
a team 65-7. I'm not suggesting they're going to Cincinnati and lose 44-7 on Sunday night, but if they play the backup quarterback and that happens, I don't know what happens here from an availability, negotiation, what you're worth when you can't play playoff game. Like, I just have a feeling this is going to get ugly to some degree, and in a really weird way, because there's no Drew Rosenhaus, that I don't even know what the internet will be alive. That's all I'm going to say, and it won't be
Right.
good. It just won't be good for anybody, I don't think.
I'm sure that the NFLPA would rather have Lamar have representation outside of his mom and himself, especially with the type of contract that Lamar was seeking in the wake of Deshaun's contract in Cleveland, which was just, absolutely just like, what are you doing? And I'm sure that the fellow owners, uh, Steve Bisciotti himself, he made that made life difficult for 31 other people in the room, and that's not the people you really want to tick off. The Palace intrigue with all of this is going to come out in the wash the second that the team loses, and the next day, players will start talking. Hey, this is what was going on. This is where we were. And it is entirely possible, because of the type of player that Lamar is, and I had players in the NFL that I worked with, Dante Stallworth in New Orleans, who had the most incredibly tight hamstrings I've ever seen. What they had to do to stretch him out to play on Sundays or practice every day would make us go cry in a corner in a fetal position. Okay. And that's someone who's a wide receiver who's was very, very fast, but he had, his body was just tight and they had to really loosen him up for practices and games so he wouldn't get hurt. So you have a player like Lamar who can juke and do all these different things and cut and make defenders miss. You know, I think any player who's had a knee injury will tell you that you have to have confidence, especially in that moment, that when you stick your foot down and you make a cut or you do what you need to do, that your knee is going to hold and do exactly what it's supposed to do after an injury is the most nerve-wracking thing for an NFL player. Because the
You'd
last thing
make
you
a
want,
great agent for him right now because he should hear
yeah, I
all
mean,
of this, right? Like,
right?
and
It's
maybe
it's
he
it's
is, maybe he's not, but all the team wants is him back on the field Sunday night
right.
playing.
There is pressure for him to play. There is certainly. I'm sure he's put pressure on himself because in a contract year where he wants a big deal, I can't see why he wouldn't. If he was at close to 100% and he felt like that he was the Lamar Jackson that we all know, he would be out there. So I'll look at it from that standpoint and say there's something that's not physically there yet for him to say, I'm confident enough that when I make a cut, when I change directions, that my knee's going to hold up, my ankle's going to hold up, everything's going to be good, and I'll be able to do that. And honestly, you can't do that till you walk out on the field and actually do it in live action with live bullets flying. Okay. And I think that's, if he doesn't play this week, there will be a lot of questions at him. There'll be a lot of questions at the Ravens about what they're going to do. This is where Eric DeCosta makes his money because they've got some really hard decisions to make, and they'll have to look at the evaluation of Lamar because every player gets a physical at the start of the year before they start at training camp, and then there's an end of year physical, so they've got an idea of what the wear and tear is in that particular year. And I'm sure that they've been given chapter and verse on everything that's going on with his knee. That's going to play into it where he is physically at this point in his career. Um, you know, like I said, I'd love to know on that board that's in DeCosta's office that's closed that you can't see who is on the draft board. I'd love to know what he's got in his quarterback spots. Is that something that they're going to have to entertain here? Do they have the next quarterback in the quarterback's room right now, or are they going to have to go looking for somebody? Or are they going to trade for somebody and trade Lamar? There's all these different things. Uh, there's just a lot of intrigue here, and people tend to the lips tend to get really loose once the season's over with, and people get relaxed. You'll start hearing some of that internal information once that season ends, whenever that is for the Ravens.
Well, it's just this is unusual, right? There's a lot
Yeah.
linked to this game. There's a lot riding on this game in a lot of ways, and whatever the outcome is. Chris Pike is here. He'll be watching all the games this weekend on Super Wild Card Weekend. We're going to have a super time doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. We're going to be over G&A Coney Island Hot Dog from Highlandtown to White Marsh. Got some great guests coming out to join us as well. I'll be giving away some Maryland Lottery scratch-off tickets. I got some Raven scratch-offs left and some holiday cash drops. I always hold the wrong one up at the wrong time. I'm left and right out on my video screen. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.